So of course the first years was trying to do, classically trained, trying to do Shakespeare. But then after I realized like there were some gatekeepers of Shakespeare in this town, as one can imagine, I was not able to get through those gates. And so at a certain point, I looked at like, what shows am I doing? I was doing a lot of contemporary new works from Black playwrights. And I realized like, this is what I need to invest my heart in.
Hello, hello, and welcome to KeyBARD. I'm Thembi, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with J.J. Johnson. James J. Johnson is an actor, writer, and teaching artist whose work thrives on both stage and screen. In part one of our two-part conversation, J.J. opens up about growing up as a quirky, intelligent, and imaginative kid in the small town of Front Royal, Virginia. We dive into his earliest artistic influences, how humor became his tool for connection, the evolution of his creative process, and the play that brought his childhood friends to the theater for the very first time. J.J. Johnson is up next, right here on KeyBARD. Welcome, J.J.
Thank you so much, Thembi. Thank you for having me here.
What was the first art form that you remember experiencing?
I would say, thinking back, I think it's got to be music or television, and I'm going to lean towards television first, simply because I think that's what had the initial influence on me, the biggest impact initially.
And you saw TV and you were like, I want to be inside that box.
I think at first I don't think it was it was a conscious decision or a thought back then, but I just felt like I was a part of the box. Like I just felt like I was just an extension of the realities. I was a very bizarre kid. So I felt like there were kids or like kids. I felt like there were like these white kids or white families watching me, even when I wasn't watching TV. So I would perform, even in like my private play moments. I was performing for the camera. Um, very
For
young,
the white
3, 4
children,
years old. For the white
specifically.
children, they had to be white.
Was that different
Yeah.
than your performances for the Black children and other children of color? I'm just curious, like, did you
I
change your
mean,
material?
I mean, like at that time, most of the Black children I encountered were in my family. And I think I mean, again, this is the late 70s, early 80s. So it's all the racial media, type of ideas that, we know were present in the lack
Mm-hmm.
of diversity in programming. So I think it was coming from what I was watching, which were a lot of sitcoms, a lot of white sitcoms at that time, especially. And like being so entertained by them. And so the idea that when I thought about me entertaining, it was to a white audience. That may be still true.
Oh, wow.
Now that I say it, I'm like, I don't think I think it's less than, but as a kid, like I definitely remember having this vision in my head of like a white family watching me on television.
That's so interesting. And then I remember during those times, especially like in the mid 80s, there
Mm,
was this crop of shows that were hosted by kids. Do you remember that? Like a lot of those, like the Nickelodeon was coming through, and you'd see a lot of, I mean, I saw
okay.
local and national, like kid reporters and kids doing things. There was just interesting. It might
Right.
have been inspired by like the Goonies or something, but there was definitely like this genre of kid hosted and kind of kid led programming. And I'm curious if any of that resonated with you as a kid.
Sure. I'm trying to think back. What I remember seeing kids a lot of times was just when I watched PBS. So like those shows like Sesame Street, The Electric Company. When I was sick and I had to stay home from school, like I used to love to watch PBS during the day. So I think a lot of those children, seeing those children on those shows too, had a big influence.
Mm-hmm.
Because I loved it, and we were poor, so we didn't have cable for a long time, and so I watched PBS, and then we had maybe ABC, sometimes Channel 5 before it was even Fox 5.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the attitude of we had the antenna, so the antenna, if it was in a bad mood, you might get two channels or you might get one. But PBS it was so comfortable to watch. because I was learning, but also I was entertained. But so I think, yeah, like seeing the children definitely had a big influence.
You grew up in Front Royal, Virginia, right?
Oh yeah.
Talk about what that was like. What is Front Royal, Virginia like? And then how did growing up in that environment shape you as an artist?
Wow. How much time do we have?
We got all day,
Let's see.
JJ. Take your
We got
time.
all. So Front Royal is in the mountains. If you go about 70 miles west of DC, it was a small town. It's a small town still, but at that time, I think population in the town itself was maybe about 7 to 8,000 people.
Wow.
Very white, predominantly white, 95% ish white, extremely conservative. I wasn't political minded as a kid, and it was not until, now that I'm older and looking back, I'm like, oh wow, like very conservative. So coming up in that very white, very Christian, very conservative town, and where we grew up, you had there were like two neighborhoods that we knew about that were considered black neighborhoods. The area that I grew up in was called the Royal Village, and it's actually still a pretty diverse neighborhood, considering like this is 1970 79 when we moved there. So there, those predominantly white and predominantly like working class, poor working poor, working class people. There were quite a few black families around at that time in that neighborhood. So this is a neighborhood I'm growing up in, where my neighbors on either side are white. But then my best friend Corey and his mother live across the street from me. They're black, and then there's a couple black families scattered down the street. So I found myself playing with white kids quite a bit, but also Corey would come over. He was a little bit older, so Corey would come over and he would play. And I started to learn that, Corey was very good at sports. A couple of other kids were pretty good. I was terrible. And I learned pretty early on, like, that was not a good thing to be as a young black man, is terrible at sports. So this is me learning, like, how do I navigate this world where, one, I'm not good at sports, I'm not cool. Corey would try to teach me basketball to no success whatsoever. But he taught me how to break dance, taught me how to roller skate, things of this sort. So like I was learning
He
some
was
things
cool. I got like he
oh
knew all
yeah,
that stuff
yeah.
already.
Yeah, he was one of those people that was just naturally like gifted, like just in those areas. So like he would try to teach me these things, and so I would learn these things. For he's the one who introduced me to hip hop,
Mm.
and so
Hmm.
like big influence. And to this day, he's still like my best friend. But other than him, like it was mostly white kids that I was hanging out with because he kind of chose a different path as we got older. And so I learned early on the art of code switching. Once I got into school, most of my classes, once I became more involved in school, like in honors classes, advanced courses, the kids in my classes were overwhelmingly white. So learning how to navigate these spaces and not disappear into the corner or become invisible, I realized like how to be funny. That was because I couldn't be popular because of my athletic ability, and so, again, like all this is unconscious, but this is how just young JJ is trying to navigate this world.
Well,
Uh,
do
where
you feel like, I'm sorry, do you feel like though that a part of that having to navigate the world was because society was trying to put you in a box? You talked about the issue of, being a,
Absolutely. And I mean, that's,
yeah,
looking again as an adult, I can look back and see that. But as a kid, I just know like I can feel these tensions.
yeah.
I think all kids are fighting to not become invisible socially. And as a black kid in a very white classrooms, I was good at spelling bees, like things, but that was something that was seen like that's what, mostly white kids did. So I knew I had to do something, like I felt like I needed to do something special to kind of really stand out and achieve some sort of social currency or something. So I knew like around fourth grade or so, I had a teacher who I found to be, he was very funny, Mr. Dudek, and very funny man. And so he invited like banter. And I began to like go back and forth with him. And I realized like I had a quick wit. And it was through, talking with him, I learned that. But then also he turned around and would write notes to my parents about my behavior. Not that I was making great grades, but then he was like, JJ, his behavior sometimes, he talks a bit much or, but it was me
What?
getting excited
After he
because
encouraged you? Wait, hold on.
Thembi,
Oh, now
Thembi.
see, that's some bad. Oh my gosh. I know you must have been
Thembi.
so confused as a child. Like, I thought we were cool. I
Yeah.
thought we had a banter going on.
Yeah.
What a
Yeah. And that
betrayal.
happened a couple of times through, from that point forward through, high school, where, I would feel a permission in the class from a teacher because I wouldn't go there with teachers if I felt like, okay, these are not fun teachers. These are not teachers that invite this, kind of banter, this kind of wit.
Hmm.
But then ultimately at some point I would get a note on my report card that, I talk a little bit too much or, like I would, just need to watch my behavior. And again, as I get older and I start to get out into the world and meet more black people in the community, and I'm like, oh, a lot of black kids were getting these kind of notes about
Yeah.
our behavior.
Yep.
Even though, like, I was a good kid, like, I was very focused on being a good kid. Like, no one was more focused about behaving.
Hmm.
But that was like the one behavioral note that I got over the years. And then there were teachers and bus drivers in particular, I remember, who would sometimes say at the end of the year, oh, we thought you'd be a problem when you came into my class or when you started riding my bus. And I'm like, why why would you think that? Other
Wow.
than the color of my skin. Because I had always had very good record behaviorally and always on a roll. So it's just
Yeah.
this is the environment. And again, like
Microaggressions
these are
abound.
abounding. And I grew up in that world
Yes.
where it was just like it was so present. Microaggressions were present every day. It wasn't, and sometimes the macroaggressions, a lot of times those would pop up too. And so it's just this world of macro and microaggressions constantly, at your neck. And finally getting out of front row, which I knew I wanted to do um, pretty early in my life. I was like, I don't want to live the rest of my life in
Can
this
I
area.
can I ask you
And
a question about Front Royal? How your family ended up there? Was
sure.
there like what was the predominant work location? Was there a factory or was there a mine or was there like Front Royal? It's in the mountains, so I'm just imagining like maybe I'm getting too agriculture. No, that's not agriculture.
No, no, you're spot on actually,
Land.
because there was,
Okay.
and my family didn't work there, but and where we across the street from where we lived was Avtex's factory. It was Avtex Fibers. They made like materials for NASA and other things. Super fun site. Became national news in the late 80s because it was polluting us, like exponential pollution in the
Oh
air, in the
God.
river. And I mean, we joked about it because you could smell, like it smelled horrible. It smelled like a septic tank in the air. Like every evening you come home or, when you in the evenings, it was just this smell in the air. And then the EPA came and was like, yo, this place is awful. You're not following any codes. We're going to shut you down. So they shut it down once. Then they reopened it again. And then like a month or a year later, months or a year later, they closed it down permanently. So that was a big employer in the town. So when that shut down, like it kind of sent the local economy into a bit of a tizzy. And of course, like causes inner, tensions within the town. But my parents moved. They were living in Warrenton, Virginia, which is only like 35 miles away from Front Royal. Both of my parents lived in that area. They got married very young. I was born, and wanting to get from underneath their families, they moved to Front Royal because they had an opportunity to get a townhouse for very cheap because neither one of them had anything. So Front Royal offered them a way to afford, barely afford a place to live with this young nerdy child in tow. Uh, and then my dad started preaching. So my dad's a preacher, and he was asked to pastor a church that was not too far from Front Royal, outside of Front Royal. So it just made sense. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom for the first 4 years of my life. So it was just my dad working during that time, and he was a construction worker, so he would commute anyway to like Northern Virginia for the construction work, and then he would pastor, on the weekends or whatever he needed to do. But he was the only one working until I turned 4, and then my mom started to work as well.
And so, given this framework and what you talked about in terms of what you experienced in school, as you started to develop as an artist, how did these elements of your formative years come through in your work?
I think early on, thinking back to college, I was looking at everything, I think, through the white artistic gaze. So my goals, and this, when we meet, you're a part of this, but my goals were, was to become like a classically trained Shakespearean actor. And so when I first got out of college, like my focus was on like doing as much Shakespeare as I could because it was the external white validation that I got from doing that. So we met because of Shakespeare's Sister, which was a
Yep.
black Shakespeare company,
Mm-hmm.
started by Josette Murray. Shout out.
Shout out.
And this is like '99 when I auditioned for this, 1999, and it was all black company. And I had had some Shakespeare experience in college, but this is my first time doing it, professionally. And it was a way to marry that idea that I had with, actually being black. And at this point, like once I went to school in Richmond, I went to college in Richmond, I had formed, great bonds with the black community down there. It was very eye opening for me and it's exactly what I needed. And so, once I finished at VCU and came to the DC area to start my career, and it just helped to expand my idea of what I wanted to do. So, of course, the first years was trying to do, classically trained, trying to do Shakespeare. But then after I realized like there were some gatekeepers of Shakespeare in this town, as one can imagine,
Oh
I
my
was not able
gosh.
to get through those gates. And so at a
Yeah.
certain point, I looked at like, what shows am I doing? I was doing a lot of contemporary new works from black playwrights. And I realized like, this is what I need to invest my heart in. The work of my own community, the work that had come to mean a lot to me. And you know what? If Shakespeare happens, it happens, but I don't need to waste my time pursuing that if the gatekeepers are going to be this gatekeeping.
And boy, were they gatekeeping.
They were extremely gatekeepy. And so, like, from '99 to about 2003, I did like 11 productions of Shakespeare.
That's pretty incredible.
It was cool. But then, like, I turned union, and then, the gatekeepers, like, really, you're not coming in here. So
Mm.
I just stopped. And so I haven't done Shakespeare in 20 years.
Wow.
And I'm okay with that now.
Huh.
And so I think growing up in Front Royal, having that need again for white validation, and this goes back to the idea that I was performing for a white family, influenced, especially early on. And so Wannabe, the first play that I wrote, kind of just throws all that into like this pot, like this gumbo of like my life experience as a young kid, the need for white validation, like all that's kind of in there and helped to inspire that show. So, that influenced my writing, especially as I was starting out as a professional writer. But I think it also adds to the things that I find funny because, a lot of my influences, especially in early sitcoms, were white comedians, white comedy. So I can watch white comedy and appreciate a lot of it. And I try to incorporate, some of the rhythms and ideas that I found inspiration in into the black comedy as well, and like marry those two together and see what I can come up with. So throwing that into like a hip hop theater piece, or it's so much a part of my DNA now. Like it just kind of happens. But yeah, like I think all of those experiences growing up in a small town, watching a lot of white centric television, it's kind of, I don't know. It's a part of the DNA, so it just comes out.
You talk a lot about the work that you did early on in your career as an actor. How did you come to form your creative process? What is that process when you're building a character? Is it the same every time or does it depend on the project? Like you talked about doing classical work versus contemporary work. Is your creative process different with character building and character research in those different genres, or is it just the same across the board?
I usually start in the same place and then find like if I'm connecting, if I feel like I'm connecting, then continuing. But I also try to remain flexible to trying different things. I think just in general, like, I start internally and work, from internal to external. But then sometimes I find that I need to do something external and work from the outside in, making some sort of physical choice that will then influence and work on, finding how it affects me internally. But I think the process starts with me reading the script, reading the words of the character out loud and seeing how they feel. If I feel connected to the words, if I don't, then what do I need to do to get connected to these words? And so that's when I try to get a little more creative and open. Going back to when we were doing the Romeo and Juliet outreach project many years ago, we had worked for quite a while, and we were working on I think it was the fifth act when Romeo is banished, and I was having some challenges finding that connection to the isolation. I was living in Front Royal at the time, and like so, commuting from Front Royal to Maryland and DC for these rehearsals and for this process. And I took one Saturday, I went up into Skyline Drive, which is like a mountain. You're driving along the mountains, and there are overlooks. And so I stopped at one of the overlooks, overlooking, overlooks Front Royal and the mountains and green, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful overlook. So I just went out there with my script and I just belted out, Romeo's lines and speeches in banishment. And it just the feeling of that, I was like, oh my gosh, like it opened up the things I needed to open up in myself. And I remember that sensation. I made note of that sensation and I took it back with me, back into the rehearsal process. And it made all the difference for me to be able to do that and to carry that forward into the process. And I think it opened up what I needed to open up to finish out the rest of the show. And there have been other times, like when I did the film Two Saved, we were rehearsing one day, and the character Bobby was supposed to be this guy who, was from the streets and stuff. And if you know me, I know I have my past in the streets. It's obvious that I've lived the thug life, but I needed some help. And one of the actors who was watching on the side was like, she just volunteered. She's like, I don't believe you. And I'm like,
Really?
all right.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So I, of course, as an actor, I took that kind of heavy, but I went home that week and I went to like Modell's or sporting goods store and I bought like a big, like sweatsuit, boots, and I felt what it was like to, because I was wearing like like loafers or something at rehearsal, like khakis or whatever. So like it was just I was just kind of the energy was a little light. So I put on the boots, I put on the sweats, and I walked around in that gear, and I was like, oh, my feet were heavy, and it just doing something external helped me to kind of connect better. And when I came back the next week, I got the approval from the same actor that I had done the work, and the director was happy. It's just being willing to be open and being flexible. Um, when you reach those challenges. So yeah, I don't try to have like one particular technique. It's just whatever I need to do to get to where I need to be.
I like that. It's like scene work because you're using various tactics to get at the character. You're just figuring out what are the
Exactly.
different ways that I can explore this person's humanity, this person's environment, this person's feelings and ways of seeing the world. And I did a workshop with some kids just yesterday, in fact, where
Hmm.
I put some costume pieces on them. I was telling them all about theater and we were talking about all aspects of theater. And one of my favorite things to do is just to bring costumes and kids like put the costume on them so they can feel like, and I ask them how they feel and what kind of person do they feel like. And we talk about how costumes can transform you and make you feel like a whole different person.
Yes.
And there's so
Yes.
much power there. And I don't think we talk about that enough because really that's to me a manifestation of our real lives. The way that
Hmm.
we get up and dress and go out into the world. You had the loafers on at rehearsal because that's who you were and that's the identity that you constructed for yourself, but you were able to construct a whole different identity just by changing your clothes. And that's something that we all do every day. We
Hmm.
construct various identities and how we adorn ourselves and how we present ourselves, and there's so much flexibility in that.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate when you see that people don't understand the fluidity of that and how powerful that is and how much of a command that you can take of yourself in your life when you decide to really be conscious of that. And it's, how you bring yourself forward, it speaks for you regardless, whether you're doing it on purpose or subconsciously. So that's
Yeah.
really interesting that you use that to help yourself build character.
Can I just give a quick shout out to someone who
Yes.
taught me a very important lesson some years
Oh, yeah.
ago? Our dear friend Dawn Ursula.
Mm.
We this community knows Dawn. We love Dawn. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my dear friend. I went and auditioned for a show that she was already cast in once before, um, some years ago, and she was in the room as a reader. And I went in and I had worked on the piece. I don't know if I worked enough on the piece, on the audition, the scene enough, but I walk in the room and she's there and it's just good to see her. And we do the scene. And I know, like, I didn't feel like I nailed the audition at all. So I walk out, I'm like, man, I sure wish I could talk to Dawn and see what she thought. I just kind of, I was like, man, I wish I could get some feedback from Dawn. But I'm like, I'm not going to reach out. I'm not going to reach out to Dawn and bug her. She's got other things to worry about. And this is how you know you got a good friend. A few days go by, and I get this email from Dawn saying, JJ, I don't want to step outside, like basically, I don't want to, step outside of my bounds, but would you be open to hearing some thoughts about your audition? And I
Mm.
was like, Dawn, please. Yes. Have you been reading my mind? Of course. Please. Uh-huh. Yeah. So we touched base and she just gave me word of advice. She's like, like you came in and you were great. But, sometimes you want to dress, you don't have to dress like the character, but just hint at the character. And she's like, I know you can do what needed to be done because I've seen you do it before. But you were, I think I was in sneakers or, like I wasn't dressed like the character, at least not enough. I think if I had on the right shoes or it would have changed my walk. So I think in that moment, I didn't honor what I had already known. And that is to like, to do something external, to try that, to influence the character. And she just reminded me of that in that moment. And, I had known Dawn for years before that moment, but just in that moment, like, this is why that's my friend. You know what I mean? Like, I want my friends to
Mm-hmm.
feel and have the permission to be able to do that and say that in those moments. And I was so thankful to her for that. And I try to keep that in mind now, as I go forward into auditions, to always keep that in mind. But again, you got to have friends like that who are willing to approach you in those situations and to offer that kind of advice.
Yeah, Dawn is a treasure.
Oh my gosh.
She's so
Yeah.
wonderful. It's just her presence, you just feel
Oh my
warmer. It's like,
gosh.
is it warm
Yeah.
in here? She's so wonderful. So yeah, that's a beautiful gift that she gave you.
I think Dawn is the sister of the sun.
She really is. She really
She
is.
is the
She
sister
makes
of the
me smile.
sun.
Just thinking about her makes me smile. Seeing her makes me smile. It's just
Yeah.
fantastic. I think
Yeah.
what she told you and what you talk about and taking that character on is so interesting because it's true. In the audition room, actors really should evoke the character. Don't make the people at the table do more work and try to imagine you in that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And those
Right.
are those
Right.
reminders that we need as actors to um not only for them but for ourselves, like you said, to help yourself get into character. And if you're coming straight from your day job and you have to go into the restroom and change into that character and that look, then it's probably a good thing to do. So I love that you
Yeah.
made that connection with her, and well, that she sensed you, she telepathically sensed, like, let me
She
check in with
did. She
JJ.
did.
So that's
She did.
wonderful. I mean, and you've done a lot of different things in theater, and you've said that you always loved work that involved the bridging of gaps between cultures, religions, races, genders, and sexual orientation. So what draws you to these themes? And can you talk a little bit about how you explore these themes in your writing and your acting?
I think it comes from the tensions of growing up in a very monochromatic environment where only, if you're white, if you're a male, if you're heterosexual, if you're a Christian, that was the acceptable, like that was the standard. And anything outside of that was not. And, I internalized a lot of those ideas. And it was until like college when I started, like some of those ideas start to break for me in terms of like the homophobia that I internalized, the sexism, all those things start to crack as I start to meet different types of people. And so I found my life so full of moments of diversity from college into like even after college, working at a global youth village, meeting people from around the world that we all met in this small town in Southern Virginia called Bedford. And there's this global youth village called Legacy, and they would bring staff and students from around the world each summer to participate in like leadership training, arts programs like visual and performing arts. And so this it was this summer that I spent in '97, right after I graduated, where I got to like live with people from Nigeria, Japan, Ireland, Muslim, Christian, just all types of different people, and all these fears that I carried about like Muslims as a young Christian man, like growing up with these ideas of what all these things were and what they were associated with, and realizing like no, like I ultimately learned like people are just people. And of course, with that, like everyone has their own fears, but is what do you do with those fears? Do you continue to hold on to them, or do you like let them go and actually listen and observe people? And I think we get so loud in our head about, if I'm in a room with someone who, is not like me, or, if I'm a straight man and I'm in a room with, a gay couple, and I don't, and I don't, and I haven't had that experience before, those fears that I have begin to like explode. And unless you learn to quiet those fears and to quiet those voices and to actually just look at the people, the humans in front of you, then I think that's how we've gotten to the point where we are today politically. But also, like, you rob yourself of an opportunity to meet some really incredible people. You meet incredible people when you quiet those fears and you allow yourself to live in the moment. And that's what I learned to do from college on, because I was meeting for the first time in college, I was meeting members of the LGBTQI community, and those fears would pop up, but I knew enough to shut up, to shut my mouth, to shut the fears up, and to just invest in the people. And I learned, like, I met incredible people that way. And so as time goes on, and now I'm creating work, uh, or I'm doing work, I always appreciated being in a room with different types of people, because I found so much beautiful energy in those environments. Because I mean, what we ultimately know is that we're all the same. We all basically want the same things, and it's not a competition culturally, or whatever. It's we can have these things together. If we work together, we can have these things together. If I'm not getting something, it's not because of, someone of a different culture or different sexuality. It's because, there's some breakdown in communication or something, someone's trying to convince us that that's the enemy, but it's not true. And it's never been true. But there are people who have a vested interest in making sure that we believe that that's true, whether it's a religious group or a certain economic class that needs us to believe that, our enemy comes from the outside. But we know, and I think artists, we know this. I mean, why do you think they're attacking the Kennedy Center right now?
Mm-hmm. Isn't that the first thing that gets attacked? Culture,
Right,
when you're trying
right.
to break down a society
So I mean, like,
and get control of it?
right. So to me, it's only kind of natural as an artist to want to invest in the diversity that we have. And so when I write now, I try to think, how can I include things that are outside of just me? Like, I'm a black heterosexual man who grew up Christian, but there's a whole journey there, whole other podcast. But I want to give voice and try to give voice to other people outside of that demographic, and to also be aware of how, I can place characters in there that are of different cultures or different, but also making sure that I don't that I do it that I honor them, and not like dishonor them by making some microaggressive move, or making a character or making a caricature of who they are, and trying to give them, to fill them with humanity. So just honoring people, doing my best to honor people, with the way that I, add them into the things that I create. So even with like the films that I've been writing, sometimes I'm like, hey, does this couple have to be straight? Or does this couple have to be, two black
It's a
people?
great question.
So like just
Yeah.
finding
Yeah.
those points where I'm like, can we actually like mix this up a bit? Can we shake this up a bit?
Mm-hmm.
And I found like people are like, oh, because I think sometimes we just don't think about it. We just write, we kind of get into, cruise control, autopilot. And it was like, oh, let's actually, what if when I wrote Central Time, I'm like, can I have a protagonist who's a 70-year-old black woman? Like, like
Yes.
why
Yes,
does the protagonist
please.
have to be like 30, or like, can we just do
30. Yeah,
so let's
exactly.
let's let's shake it up a bit.
Yeah. I love that. You talked a little bit earlier about Wannabe.
Mm.
Can you tell us what the general plot is of Wannabe, and can you tell us what led you to write the piece?
So Wannabe, uh, it's not so much plot driven as like character, exploration. But it's three friends, three black boys. You watch them grow up, and they're the three paths that they take. So one, Jay, who's based on me, is the kid who he's from the same neighborhood, but is nerdy, does well in school, has a terrible time trying to, he can't talk to girls, very autobiographical. And then there's the character of Quentin, who's actually based on Corey, who I talked about, who taught me how to break dance and all that. He's a cool guy, cool guy, can do all the things, is a ladies' man, ends up being a teenage father, so that becomes a challenge. And then you have the character of Ubi, who's based on a childhood friend who is more streetwise, gets involved in dealing, and is in and out of like the juvenile system. So you have these three friends who are, on three very different paths, but also who maintain this friendship in this town where the environment is, as I described, white, Christian, conservative. There's a girl who comes to town, moves to the area, who challenges them, who's not, willing to be the idea of what a girl should be. And so there, she adds like a foil to these three young boys. But all in all, like all of these people have this bond and this friendship in the Royal Village, in this community. And they grow up and you see the challenges that the drug game has, that the closing of Avtex, the Superfund site, has on the family, the racism, how that plays into it, and through it all, can these friendships hold? Particularly when it comes to Jay, who's become so involved with school and loses touch kind of with his friends in the community, and then something tragic happens, and it's like how do we come back together after this, and how do we mend these distances and these things that have happened through time. But it's just an exploration of like kids who grew up in the same community and like are threatened by the distance as they get older. How these problems kind of grow and evolve as you get older and they mature. Like hopefully in the script, I tried to be conscious of like in each scene, we go a couple years down the road, that we see the maturity in the script. So, as kids, it's just about like breakdancing and being cool. But then as time goes on, it becomes about, oh, let me it's about taking tests and getting my license, or dealing with the judicial system, or you watch them mature over the 90 minutes or whatever of show time.
How did your friends take the script in terms of the characters that are based on them? What was their reaction?
Corey came to see it when it was at the Capitol Fringe last year, and he and his mother were there, and then his ex-wife, who they have two children together, she came as well, and like the character of Sasha is based on her. So they were just thrilled. They were just thrilled. Like they got the biggest laugh out of it. And again, like these are people from the neighborhood that I grew up with. His mother, Dorothy, is like my second mother. She came to see some of the shows I did in college. But Corey and Nova have never been to any of my shows. And sometimes I think about that. I'm like, I've been doing this for a long time, but it's just I understand, like in that community, like theater arts, the arts is just not a thing that people do. So it took writing a show about them to get them to the show, to get them to DC to the show. But like they were so they got a chance to meet the actors, and they were so just over the moon about the story being told. The opening scene is based off an actual moment that Corey and I had as kids, kissing an old black and white television screen when the Mandrell sisters were on TV, and like burning our lips.
Oh my
And so
God.
that's how it started. Like I wrote that scene, like 12 years ago, and then I just left the scene in my hard drive. And it wasn't until like maybe 5 years later when I picked it up and just, continued writing. Thanks to Sonal, my wife, like telling me you need to write that whole script out. But I just remember that story of Corey and I as like 7-year-olds kissing the TV and burning our lips. So that's where it started. It's like the innocence of, and also like the innocence of black boys. Like these are black boys who may do stereotypical things, but like they're kids.
Mm,
And it's
hmm.
a shame that we have to keep reminding society, like they may be black kids, but they're kids. Tamir Rice, Trayvon, they're kids.
Yeah. Yeah. To resist the adultification of kids
Yep.
and the classification of kids as men and
Right.
women
Yep.
when they're children.
Yeah.
I love that you introduced your friends to theater. Like what an amazing way to gain access to theaters, to see yourself in the characters, in the stories. That really is, in my opinion, what theater is about.
Yeah.
And so as long as it took for them to see your work, they saw the right one.
I'm gonna tell you,
They saw the right
yeah.
thing.
The timing could not have been better because weeks after that, my friend Corey had a stroke, which has drastically changed his life, and he's now not able to work. It's affected him physically, and vocabulary wise, like his speech has been greatly affected. And so like his life has in his life, his mother's life, like all of our lives around him, you know, have changed. And so he got a chance to see his story be told weeks before this incident occurred. And he's resilient, he's fighting, and I go to see him when I go up to Front Royal, but it's this has been my friend for 45 years.
Wow.
And so I'm glad that he had a chance to experience the theater. It's something that I made, something about him before this happened.
Oh, that's powerful. That's powerful. If that's not a reason to know that what you're doing is important, I don't know what else you need. I don't know what other signs you need, JJ.
Right, right.
Hey, KeyBARDs, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my 2-part conversation with JJ Johnson. In part 2, JJ breaks down the power of solo performance, his process for writing for film, and the story behind Galvanize, an incredible support network for Black theater artists in Washington, D.C. I'm Thembi. This is KeyBARD. Till next time. KeyBARD is produced, directed, and hosted by Thembi Duncan. Theme music produced by Psycho Sid. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow, leave a review, or give us a 5-star rating. Your support helps the show reach more listeners, and it means the world to me. Thank you for listening.